The sound of hoofbeats pounding against dry earth shattered the dawn silence as Grace O'Malley clutched her empty arms, her screams echoing through the small cabin where just moments before her 6-month-old son had been sleeping peacefully. It was 1878 in the unforgiving territory of Arizona, and the Callahan Gang had finally made good on their threats they'd taken her baby boy to settle her late husband's gambling debts. Grace sank to her knees on the rough wooden floor, her nightdress stained with the coffee that had spilled when 3 men burst through her door at first light. They'd left a crude note nailed to her son's empty cradle. "A debt's a debt, Mrs. O'Malley. Your husband owed us $300. You got 2 weeks to get it, or you won't be seeing your boy again." Her husband Patrick had been dead for 2 months, killed in a barroom fight in Tucson, leaving behind nothing but debts and a reputation for poor decisions. Grace hadn't even known about the money he owed to the notorious Callahan Gang until they'd started visiting her homestead 3 weeks ago, making increasingly violent threats. The nearest law was in Redemption Springs, a half-day's ride away, and Sheriff Miller had already made it clear that he had little interest in pursuing outlaws over private debts. Grace had no family, no money, and now, no son. She forced herself to stand, wiping tears from her face with trembling hands. $300 might as well have been 3,000. She owned nothing of value except the small homestead Patrick had claimed, 10 acres of stubborn land that barely yielded enough to feed them. A cloud of dust on the horizon caught her attention as she stepped onto the porch. A lone rider was approaching from the direction of town. Grace retreated inside, grabbing her husband's old shotgun from above the door. She checked that it was loaded, then returned to the porch. The weapon held steady despite her fear. The rider slowed as he approached, and Grace recognized Xander Novak, owner of the neighboring ranch that sprawled across 500 acres to the west of her modest homestead. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly beneath his hat, and eyes that reminded her of the sky just before a storm. At 32, Xander was known throughout the territory for 3 things: his prize-winning horses, his skill with a revolver, and the fact that he kept mostly to himself. "Mrs. O'Malley," he called, keeping a respectful distance. "I heard shooting. Everything all right?" Grace lowered the shotgun slightly but kept it visible. "They took him. They took my son." Xander dismounted in one fluid motion, tying his horse to her porch post before approaching cautiously. "Who did?" "Callahan Gang. For Patrick's debts." Her voice cracked. $300 or I never see my boy again." Something dark crossed Xander's face. "The Callahans don't make idle threats." "I know that," Grace snapped, her fear converting to anger. "But what am I supposed to do? I don't have $300. I barely have $3. Xander removed his hat, revealing a streak of silver in his dark hair despite his relatively young age. "I had some dealings with the Callahans years back. I know where they hole up." Grace stared at him. In the 2 years she'd lived beside his property, they'd exchanged perhaps a dozen sentences. Patrick had always said Xander Novak was standoffish, though he'd grudgingly admitted the man was fair in his business dealings. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I can find them. And your boy." His voice was matter-of-fact, as though he were discussing the weather instead of tracking down a gang of ruthless outlaws. "Why would you help me?" Grace asked, suspicion momentarily overriding her desperation. Xander replaced his hat, his expression unreadable. "Because taking a child is crossing a line, and because no law's going to help you, meaning you'll try something foolish on your own and get yourself killed." He wasn't wrong. Grace had already been considering what few options she had, none of them promising. "I can't pay you," she said finally. "I'm not asking for payment." He glanced at the rising sun. "Pack what you need. I'll be back at noon. We're going after your boy." "We? You think I'd leave you here alone with them knowing where you live? Besides, a baby needs its mother." Before Grace could respond, Xander was back on his horse, riding toward his ranch. She watched until he disappeared over the rise, clutching the shotgun to her chest. She had no reason to trust Xander Novak, but she had no choice either. If there was any chance of getting her son back, she had to take it. By noon, Grace was waiting on the porch with a small bundle of necessities. She'd changed into her only pair of sturdy trousers and a faded blue shirt that had belonged to Patrick, her long chestnut hair braided and pinned tightly to her head. Around her waist was a belt with a holster holding Patrick's revolver. She might not be an expert shot, but she knew enough to protect herself. True to his word, Xander returned, leading a second horse, a steady-looking bay mare with a white blaze. Behind him rode a weathered man with iron-gray hair whom Grace recognized as Josiah Tucker, Xander's ranch foreman. "Mrs. O'Malley." Josiah nodded in greeting. "Mr. Novak filled me in. I'll keep an eye on your place while you're gone." "Thank you," Grace replied, touched by the unexpected kindness. "The Callahans operate out of Dead Horse Canyon, about 3 days' ride southeast of here," Xander explained, dismounting to help secure her bundle to the saddle. "We'll need to move fast but careful. Tucker will stay here in case they circle back." "My son's name is James," Grace said suddenly, needing them to know he was real, not just the baby or the boy. "He's 6 months old. He has a birthmark shaped like a half moon on his left shoulder." Xander's expression softened momentarily. "We'll find him, Mrs. O'Malley." "Grace," she corrected him. "If we're riding into danger together, you might as well use my given name." "Grace, then." He offered a hand to help her mount, his calloused palm warm against hers. "And I'm Xander." They rode east until sundown, making good time across the arid landscape. Xander set a pace that was urgent but not punishing for the horses, clearly mindful of the long journey ahead. He spoke little, occasionally pointing out landmarks or warning of difficult terrain, but otherwise keeping his thoughts to himself. As twilight deepened, they made camp in a small arroyo that offered some protection from the wind and concealment from anyone passing by. Xander efficiently built a small, smokeless fire while Grace unpacked their provisions. "Were you acquainted with my husband?" Grace asked as they ate a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. Xander considered the question before answering. "We had dealings. Bought a horse from him once." "But you didn't like him," Grace guessed, noting the careful neutrality in his voice. "Wasn't my place to like or dislike him? He was your husband." "He wasn't a good man," Grace said softly, staring into the fire. "I know that now, though I couldn't see it when I married him. He had a silver tongue and big dreams, but his vices were bigger." Xander looked up at her, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to understand that I'm not a fool. I know Patrick brought this trouble on us on our son, but James is innocent, and I'll do whatever it takes to get him back." "I believe you," Xander replied simply. "You still haven't told me why you're really helping me?" Grace pressed. For a long moment, Xander was silent, methodically cleaning his revolver by the light of the fire. "I had a sister once," he finally said, his voice low. "Rebecca. When she was 16 and I was 20, a man came through our town in Nebraska. Smooth-talking fellow. Said he was a businessman from St. Louis. He took a shine to Rebecca, convinced her to run away with him. Turned out he was trafficking young women to mining camps out west." Grace's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, Xander. I'm so sorry. I tracked them for 6 months. Found her in a brothel in Nevada." His jaw tightened. She'd taken her own life the week before I arrived. The silence between them grew heavy with the weight of his words. "So that's why," Grace finally said. "You couldn't save your sister, but you can help save my son." Xander holstered his cleaned weapon. "Get some sleep, Grace. We've got a long ride tomorrow." Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Grace. Her mind kept conjuring images of James, his tiny hands, his toothless smile, the smell of his downy head. Was he crying for her? Was anyone caring for him properly? Across the fire, Xander sat with his back against a rock, hat pulled low over his eyes but clearly awake and vigilant. There was something reassuring about his steady presence, a calm competence that made her believe they might actually succeed. "He'll be all right," Xander said quietly, as though reading her thoughts. "Callahan's cruel, but he's not stupid. A dead baby isn't worth anything to him." It wasn't entirely comforting, but Grace appreciated the honesty. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." Xander merely nodded, his gaze fixed on the darkness beyond their small camp. They broke camp before dawn, riding hard through the morning. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they approached the foothills that would eventually lead them to Dead Horse Canyon. By midday, they were forced to slow their pace as they navigated narrow trails that wound through rocky outcroppings. "There's a trading post about 2 hours ahead," Xander informed her as they paused to rest the horses. "Run by a Navajo man named Key. He hears things, might have news about the Callahan's movements." "Can he be trusted?" Grace asked, accepting the canteen Xander offered. "As much as anyone can be out here. He has no love for outlaws. They robbed him twice last year." The trading post turned out to be a low adobe structure nestled against a red rock cliff. Several horses were hitched outside, including one that made Xander tense visibly. "That's Vince Callahan's mare," he said quietly. "The gang leader's brother. Stay close to me, and let me do the talking." Grace's heart hammered in her chest as they dismounted. If one of the Callahans was here, could James be nearby too? Inside, the trading post was dim and crowded with merchandise stacks of furs, barrels of flour and sugar, shelves of ammunition and tobacco. 3 men stood at the counter, deep in conversation with a tall Navajo man who Grace assumed was Key. One of the 3 turned as they entered, revealing a pockmarked face beneath a filthy hat. Xander gripped Grace's elbow, steering her toward a display of preserved goods while keeping the men in his peripheral vision. "That's Vince on the left," he murmured. "The other 2 are hired guns, not part of the core gang. No sign of your boy, which is good, means he's likely back at their main camp with Callahan Sr." Grace pretended to examine a jar of peaches, straining to hear the conversation at the counter. She caught fragments, something about a cattle sale in Tucson, a complaint about the quality of ammunition, a crude joke that made all 3 men laugh. After what seemed an eternity, the 3 men concluded their business and headed for the door. Vince Callahan paused as he passed them, his gaze lingering on Grace's face. "Don't believe I've had the pleasure, madam," he drawled, tipping his hat. Grace froze, but Xander smoothly inserted himself between them. "My wife's not feeling sociable today, friend. Women's troubles, you understand?" Vince smirked, his eyes flicking between them with obvious skepticism. "Sure thing, mister. You folks enjoy your shopping." His hand brushed against his holstered gun in a gesture that was not quite threatening but definitely intentional. Only when the 3 men had mounted up and ridden away did Grace release the breath she'd been holding. "He didn't recognize me," she whispered. "Likely never saw you up close. The gang probably sent their lowest members to do the collecting." Xander approached the counter where Key watched them with shrewd eyes. "Been a while, Key." "Novak," the man acknowledged. "You still looking for trouble, I see." "Information, this time. The Callahan Gang. Still operating out of Dead Horse?" Key's expression gave nothing away. "Why ask questions you already know the answer to?" "Because things change. Last I heard, they were having some disagreements with the Harmon crew over territory. Harmon's got themselves shot up last month trying to expand north. Callahans are riding high now, feeling untouchable." Key's gaze shifted to Grace. "This about the baby they took from Silver Creek?" Grace stepped forward. "You know about my son?" Key nodded. "News travels. Even bad news." He leaned closer across the counter. They're holding more than usual at the canyon. Got a big shipment of stolen horses they're planning to move south across the border next week. Everyone's there, including the little one. Hope and fear twisted together in Grace's chest. Is he all right? Have you heard anything? Just that he's alive. Old man Callahan's sister is looking after him. She's mean as a snake but raised 6 of her own, so the child's being fed at least. It wasn't much, but it was something. Her son was alive. Xander placed a gold coin on the counter. We'll need supplies, and anything else you can tell us about their current setup. By the time they left the trading post an hour later, they had fresh supplies, detailed directions, and crucially, information about the Callahan Gang's habits and defenses. Grace felt a surge of determination as they mounted up. "We're coming, James," she whispered as they rode toward the setting sun. "Mama's coming for you." They rode hard for the remainder of the day, stopping only when the darkness made continuing too dangerous. That night, their camp was cold. No fire that might attract attention, as they were now in territory the Callahans considered their own. Grace shivered beneath her blanket, her thoughts consumed by how close they were getting to James. According to Key's information, they could reach Dead Horse Canyon by late tomorrow if they pushed hard. "Here," Xander said, handing her a flask. "It's not much, but it'll warm you up." Grace took a cautious sip, the whiskey burning a path down her throat. "Thank you." She passed it back, studying his profile in the dim starlight. "Can I ask you something personal?" He shrugged, which she took as permission. "Why have you never married? A successful rancher like yourself, surely there were opportunities." Xander was quiet for so long that Grace thought he might not answer. "There was someone. Once. After Rebecca died, I was in a dark place. Lillian was a school teacher in the town where I first settled in Arizona. She was patient with me." A faint smile touched his lips. "We were engaged for a time." "What happened?" "I happened. Couldn't let go of my anger, my need to right every wrong I saw. She deserved better than half a man consumed by ghosts." He took another swig from the flask. "She married the town banker. Has 3 children now, I hear." Grace considered his words. "You think seeking justice makes you half a man?" "I think it makes you more whole than most." Xander looked at her then, really looked at her, as though seeing something new. "You're an unusual woman, Grace O'Malley." "Life hasn't exactly allowed me to be conventional," she replied with a hint of wryness. "I was raised in an orphanage in Boston after my parents died of influenza. When I turned 18, I became a mail-order bride because it seemed like the only way to have a life of my own. Married a man I'd never met based on 3 letters and a daguerreotype. And now here you are, about to raid an outlaw camp." Grace couldn't help the small, humorless laugh that escaped her. "Not exactly the life I imagined for myself. But then, James wasn't planned either. He's the one good thing Patrick gave me, and I won't let him be taken away." Xander nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Get some sleep, Grace. Tomorrow will test us both." Dawn found them already riding, making their way through increasingly narrow ravines as they approached Dead Horse Canyon. By midday, Xander led them off the trail into a hidden gully where they could rest the horses and finalize their plan. "The canyon has 1 main entrance and 2 smaller exits," Xander explained, sketching a rough map in the dirt. "Key says they keep 2 men on watch at the main entrance at all times. The north exit is too narrow for horses, but a person on foot could manage it. The east exit leads to a steep drop useful for them if they're being pursued, but not practical for us." Grace studied the crude map. "So how do we get in?" "We don't, not both of us anyway." Xander met her eyes steadily. "I go in alone, after dark. You'll wait here with the horses, ready to ride as soon as I return with your son." "Absolutely not," Grace protested. "I'm coming with you. He's my child." And if he sees you, he'll cry out or make noise that could alert the gang. I can move more quietly alone." Xander's voice was firm but not unkind. "I know you want to be there, but our best chance, James's best chance, is for me to slip in and out as invisibly as possible." Grace wanted to argue further, but the logic of his words was undeniable. Still, the thought of waiting behind while someone else rescued her son felt wrong in every way. "What if something happens to you?" she asked quietly. "Then you take the horses and ride straight to Fort Buchanan. It's a day and a half southwest of here. Ask for Captain Reed. Tell him everything. He's a good man, he'll help you." The matter-of-fact way he discussed his potential death made Grace's chest tighten painfully. In just 2 days, Xander Novak had become her only hope, her partner in an impossible quest. The thought of losing him now was surprisingly devastating. "I have a better idea," she said after a moment's thought. "I'll create a diversion, something to draw some of them away from the camp. Give you a better chance to find James." Xander frowned. "Too risky." "This whole plan is risky, but I'm not sitting here helplessly while you risk your life alone." Grace leaned forward, her expression determined. "You said yourself the canyon has multiple exits. If I approach from the main entrance, make them think I've come to pay the debt. It could give you time to search for James from one of the other entrances." She could see him considering it, weighing the dangers against the potential advantages. Finally, he nodded. "It could work. But you'll need to be convincing and ready to ride hard if things go wrong." They spent the remainder of the day refining their plan, accounting for as many contingencies as they could imagine. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the landscape, they prepared to put it into action. Grace changed into the dress she'd packed, arranging her hair in a simple knot at the base of her neck. She looked like a respectable widow coming to make good on her husband's debts, exactly the image they wanted to project. Beneath her skirts, however, was Patrick's revolver, strapped securely to her thigh. "Remember," Xander said as he checked his weapons one last time, "your only job is to keep them talking and looking at you. The moment you hear any commotion from elsewhere in the camp, you get on your horse and ride. Don't wait for me." "I'm not leaving without you and James," Grace insisted. Xander gripped her shoulders, his expression intense. "Promise me, Grace. James needs his mother alive." After a moment's hesitation, she nodded, though they both knew it wasn't a promise she intended to keep. "Be careful," she whispered, impulsively pressing a quick kiss to his cheek. "Find my son." Xander's expression softened momentarily. "I will." They separated with the understanding that Grace would wait 30 minutes before approaching the canyon entrance, giving Xander time to circle around to the northern exit. The waiting was excruciating, each minute stretching endlessly as Grace imagined all the things that could go wrong. Finally, it was time. She mounted the bay mare and rode slowly toward the canyon entrance, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it would give her away. As Key had informed them, 2 men stood watch at the narrow entrance, rifles ready as she approached. "That's far enough," one called when she was about 20 yards away. "State your business." Grace reined in her horse, keeping her hands visible. "My name is Grace O'Malley. I've come about my son and my husband's debt." The 2 men exchanged glances. The taller one stepped forward. "You got the money?" "I have something better," Grace replied, praying her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "Information. About a gold shipment coming through Silver Creek next week, worth a lot more than $300 to the right people." It was a lie they had concocted, designed to be enticing enough to warrant attention from the gang leaders. The guards conferred briefly, then the shorter one disappeared into the canyon, presumably to relay her message. Several tense minutes passed before he returned with another man older, with a silver-streaked beard and cold eyes that assessed Grace like she was livestock at auction. "Mrs. O'Malley," he greeted with mock cordiality, "I'm Fergus Callahan. I believe we have something of yours. Grace inclined her head slightly. And I have information you'll find valuable, Mr. Callahan. Perhaps we could discuss an exchange. Callahan's eyes narrowed suspiciously. You come alone? Awful brave for a woman. Not brave, desperate. Grace infused her voice with all the genuine emotion she felt. I want my son back. I'll do whatever's necessary. After a calculating pause, Callahan nodded. Come on in then, but know that my men are watching. Any funny business, and you'll never see your boy again. Grace followed him into the canyon, mentally counting the minutes, estimating how long Xander might need to find James. The camp was larger than she had expected, perhaps 15 men lounging around several campfires, with tents and lean-tos scattered throughout the natural enclosure. Horses were corralled in a side ravine, and wagons loaded with various goods stood nearby, evidence of the gang's successful robberies. Callahan led her to a larger tent at the far end of the camp. Wait here, he instructed before ducking inside. Grace took the opportunity to scan the camp, looking for any sign of her son. She spotted a woman hanging laundry near a smaller tent set apart from the others. Something small and pale was lying on a blanket nearby a baby. Her heart leapt. It had to be James. She fought the overwhelming urge to run to him, forcing herself to remain still and play her part. Xander would find him. She had to trust that. Callahan emerged from the tent with two other men, one of whom Grace recognized as Vince from the trading post. His eyes widened in recognition. Well, look who it is, he drawled. The wife with women's troubles. He turned to his brother. She was at Key's place yesterday, with some fella claiming to be her husband. Callahan's face hardened. Is that so? Seems you've been less than honest, Mrs. O'Malley. His hand moved to his gun. Where's your friend now? Grace's mind raced. He's nearby, with men from Fort Buchanan, she improvised. If I don't return with my son by morning, they'll come looking. Vince spat on the ground. She's bluffing. Maybe, Callahan conceded, eyeing her shrewdly. But Army involvement would complicate things. And if she really does have information about a gold shipment? He turned to one of his men. Get the baby. We'll hear what she has to say, then decide what to do with them both. Grace's pulse quickened. This was working better than they had hoped. Now she just needed to keep them talking until Xander could make his move. A commotion from the far side of the camp suddenly drew everyone's attention. A man came running, shouting something about horses being stolen. In the ensuing confusion, Grace spotted a shadow moving swiftly between tents toward the area where she had seen the baby. Xander. Callahan barked orders, sending several men to investigate while others closed ranks around Grace. Don't move, he warned, drawing his pistol. Grace nodded compliance, her eyes fixed on the distant tent where she had last seen her son. The woman who had been hanging laundry was gone now, presumably drawn away by the disturbance Xander had created. Gunshots suddenly rang out from the direction of the horse corral. More men ran toward the sound, leaving only Callahan, Vince, and one other man guarding Grace. Your friend picked the wrong camp to rob, Callahan growled, grabbing Grace's arm roughly. Let's go see if your boy recognizes his mama before I put a bullet in both of you. He dragged her toward the small tent, Vince following with his gun drawn. Grace's heart hammered wildly. This wasn't the plan. Xander was supposed to get James out first. Now they were all heading straight for him. They were halfway to the tent when a horse burst into the main area of the camp, riderless but saddled, creating another wave of confusion. In the chaos, Grace saw a familiar figure emerge from the tent, a small bundle clutched against his chest. Xander had James. Their eyes met across the camp, and in that moment, several things happened at once. Xander raised his revolver and fired, the bullet striking the ground at Callahan's feet. Callahan cursed, shoving Grace toward Vince as he drew his own weapon, and Grace, seizing her chance, pulled Patrick's revolver from beneath her skirt and slammed the butt of it against Vince Callahan's temple with all her strength. Vince crumpled, and Grace didn't wait to see if he would rise again. She ran toward Xander, weaving between tents as bullets whizzed past her. The entire camp was in uproar now, men shouting and firing blindly in the growing darkness. "Grace!" Xander called, gesturing urgently toward the northern exit where they had planned to escape. She changed direction, ducking behind a wagon as more shots rang out. When she emerged, Xander was there, pressing James into her arms. "He's all right," he assured her breathlessly. "Go. Now. The horses are waiting just beyond the exit." Grace clutched her son to her chest, tears blurring her vision as she felt his warm weight against her. "You're coming too," she insisted, even as Xander positioned himself between her and the pursuers, firing methodically to keep them at bay. "Right behind you," he promised, though she could see the doubt in his eyes. "Go." With her son in her arms and her heart in her throat, Grace ran for the narrow exit, hearing Xander's steady gunfire covering her retreat. The passage was tight but navigable, and true to his word, their horses were waiting just beyond, tethered to a stunted pine. Grace quickly secured James inside her coat, using a length of fabric to create a makeshift sling that left her hands free. He whimpered but didn't fully wake, exhausted from his ordeal. Mounting was awkward with the baby, but she managed, settling into the saddle just as Xander emerged from the passage, breathing hard. "Ride!" he shouted, swinging onto his own horse. They galloped into the darkness, the sounds of pursuit fading behind them. Xander led them on a twisting route through ravines and dry creek beds, clearly intent on throwing off any followers. Only when they had put several miles between themselves and the canyon did he signal to slow their pace. "We need to keep moving through the night," he said, voice tight with tension. "They'll be after us as soon as they regroup." Grace nodded, still scarcely able to believe that James was really here, safe in her arms. She stroked his downy head, tears streaming freely down her face. "You did it," she whispered to Xander. "You found him." He glanced over, his expression softening. "We did it. Your diversion worked perfectly." "Are you hurt?" She'd noticed he was holding his left arm stiffly. "Grazed my shoulder." "Nothing serious." He nodded toward James. "How is he?" Grace carefully examined her son in the moonlight. His face was slightly dirty, and he seemed thinner than she remembered, but otherwise unharmed. The half-moon birthmark on his shoulder confirmed what her heart already knew. This was her James. "Hungry and tired, but all right, I think." She pressed a kiss to his forehead, inhaling his scent. "Thank you, Xander. I'll never be able to repay what you've done." "No repayment necessary." His voice was gruff but warm. "Let's just focus on getting him home safe." They rode through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and feed James using the goat's milk they had procured from the trading post. By dawn, they had covered significant ground, but Xander remained vigilant, frequently checking their back trail for signs of pursuit. "We should reach Key's trading post by midday," he said as they ate a hurried breakfast of jerky and hardtack. "We can rest there briefly, then push on. If we ride hard, we could be back at your homestead in 2 more days." Grace nodded, cradling James as he nursed from a makeshift bottle. "And then what?" "The Callahans know where I live. They'll come after us." Xander was silent for a moment, his gaze distant. "I've been thinking about that. My ranch has plenty of room. You and James could stay there until we figure out a more permanent solution." The offer surprised her. "You'd do that?" "It makes sense," he said pragmatically. "Safer numbers, better defenses. Tucker and the hands would help keep watch." Grace studied him, sensing there was more to the offer than mere practicality. Something had changed between them during this journey, a connection forged through danger and shared purpose. "And after the danger passes?" she asked quietly. Xander met her gaze, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes. "That would be up to you. The offer stands either way." Before she could respond, James began to fuss in earnest, his cries growing stronger as he fully woke. Grace turned her attention to soothing him, but her mind whirled with the implications of Xander's words. Was he suggesting what she thought he was? They reached Key's trading post without incident, though the Navajo man's expression grew grave when he learned what they had done. Callahan won't forget this, he warned as he helped them replenish their supplies. He's lost face with his men. He'll come looking for revenge. Let him try, Xander replied grimly, but we'd appreciate any information if you hear of their movements. They rested for only an hour before continuing their journey, now taking a more direct route back toward Grace's homestead. James had settled somewhat, recognizing his mother despite their separation. His small hands clutched at her shirt, his eyes so like her own watching her face intently, as though afraid she might disappear again. By nightfall, they had put considerable distance between themselves and Dead Horse Canyon, though Xander insisted on maintaining watches through the night. Grace took the first shift, sitting beside the small fire with James sleeping peacefully against her chest. She watched Xander as he slept, noting the lines of exhaustion etched into his face. He had risked everything for her and James, a woman and child he barely knew. The realization filled her with a warm, unfamiliar feeling that she wasn't quite ready to name. When it was her turn to sleep, she reluctantly placed James in a nest of blankets and closed her eyes, only to be awakened sometime later by his hungry cries. As she tended to him, she noticed Xander watching them, a soft expression on his usually stoic face. "He has your eyes," he observed quietly. Grace smiled. "And his father's chin, unfortunately, but hopefully not his character. With you raising him, I doubt that'll be a concern." There was such certainty in his voice that Grace felt her cheeks warm. "You sound very confident for a man who's known me less than a week." Xander shrugged. "Some things don't take long to recognize." He hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking about what happens when we get back." "Your offer of shelter?" Grace prompted. "That, yes, but also about the Callahans." His expression grew serious. "They won't stop, Grace. Not until they've settled what they see as a debt of honor now." "What are you suggesting?" "That maybe it's time they learned that actions have consequences." He stared into the fire, his profile sharp in the dancing light. "I could ride to Fort Buchanan, speak with Captain Reed. With evidence of kidnapping, the army might finally take action against the gang." "You'd do that?" "They crossed a line taking your son. Lines like that need to be defended, or society falls apart." There was steel in his voice, reminding Grace of the depth of principle that drove this man. "And if the army refuses to help?" Xander's jaw tightened. "Then I'll handle it myself." The declaration sent a chill through Grace, not because she doubted his capability, but because she understood the cost such actions extracted from a man's soul. She had seen it with Patrick, how violence had hollowed him out until gambling and drinking were the only things that made him feel alive. "I don't want you to become like them," she said softly. "Not for me, not for James." Xander's gaze shifted to her, something fierce and protective in his eyes. "It wouldn't be like that. This would be justice, not vengeance." "Is there really a difference when you're staring down the barrel of a gun?" He had no immediate answer for that, and they lapsed into silence, each lost in their own thoughts as the fire burned low. The next day brought clear skies and easier terrain as they made their way northwest toward home. James seemed more settled now, as though sensing they were heading toward safety. He even offered a toothless smile when Xander made a silly face at him during one of their rest stops, a simple gesture that caused an unexpected tightness in Grace's chest. By midday, Xander's vigilance began to pay off. He spotted dust on the horizon behind them, the telltale sign of riders pushing hard. "Could be innocent travelers," Grace suggested without much hope. Xander shook his head. "Too direct. They're following our trail. He squinted at the distant dust cloud. 3, maybe 4 riders. Likely Callahan sent a smaller group to track us while he organized the main force. What do we do? Change plans. We're closer to my ranch than your homestead. We'll head there directly, it's more defensible, and my men will help. They altered course, pushing their tired horses harder. James, sensing the tension, began to fuss, requiring Grace to slow periodically to comfort him. Each time, Xander would circle back, his expression taut with concern. They're gaining, he reported during one such stop. We need to find a place to make a stand before they catch us in the open. Grace's stomach clenched with fear, but she nodded resolutely. Tell me what to do. Xander scanned the landscape, then pointed to a rocky outcropping about half a mile ahead. There. Natural cover. Elevation advantage. We can hold them off there until dark, then slip away. They made for the rocks, reaching them just as their pursuers came clearly into view. 4 riders, pushing their horses mercilessly across the arid terrain. Xander helped Grace and James into a protected position among the boulders, then untied their saddlebags and a canteen. Stay here. Keep James quiet if you can. He checked his revolvers methodically. I'll try to convince them to turn back, but be ready to run if things go badly. My ranch is that way. He pointed northwest, about 5 miles. Follow the creek bed, you can't miss it. Grace clutched his arm. Don't you dare sacrifice yourself, Xander Novak. James and I need you. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, then a warmth that made her breath catch. I'll do my best to oblige you, madam, he said, with the ghost of a smile. He positioned himself on a flat rock with good visibility, both revolvers ready but not yet drawn. The 4 riders approached cautiously, spreading out as they neared the outcropping. That's far enough, Xander called when they were about 50 yards away. The riders stopped. One of them, a lean man with a dust-covered bandana covering the lower half of his face, nudged his horse forward slightly. We're just looking for a woman and baby, he called back. Callahan family business. Step aside, and you won't get hurt. The woman and child are under my protection, Xander replied evenly. Ride back to Fergus and tell him to consider the debt paid in full. The lead rider laughed harshly. Paid in full? After what you did to our camp? After you shot Will Collins? Fergus wants his money, the woman, and your head on a pike. From her hiding place, Grace felt a chill at the casual mention of violence. Had Xander killed someone during their escape? She hadn't seen it happen, but in the confusion of gunfire and darkness, anything was possible. Then we have a problem, Xander responded, his voice steady, because none of those things are going to happen today. The standoff lingered, tension building as neither side moved. Then, with a suddenness that made Grace gasp, the lead rider drew his pistol. But Xander was faster. 2 shots rang out in quick succession, and the leader tumbled from his saddle. Chaos erupted. The remaining riders scattered, firing wildly as they sought cover. Xander dropped flat behind his rock as bullets pinged off the stone around him. When there was a brief pause in the shooting, he rose and fired methodically, his aim deliberate. Another rider fell, clutching his shoulder and cursing loudly. The remaining 2 seemed to lose their appetite for the fight, retreating to a safer distance while dragging their wounded companion. This isn't over, Novak, one of them shouted. It is for today, Xander called back. Take your wounded and go. Tell Callahan if he wants to continue this. I'll be waiting. But the woman and child are off limits. After a tense standoff, the outlaws retreated, supporting their injured comrade between them. Only when they were well out of sight did Xander return to where Grace and James were hiding. Are you both all right? He asked, his voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. Grace nodded, her arms tight around James, who had remarkably slept through most of the gunfire. You know them? They knew your name. My reputation, more likely. I've had run-ins with their type before. Xander helped her to her feet. We should move. They'll be back with reinforcements once they report to Callahan. They rode hard for the remainder of the day, James securely fastened to Grace's chest. As the sun began to set, the landscape opened up into a broad valley, and Grace caught sight of buildings in the distance, a large main house, a barn, several outbuildings, all enclosed by a sturdy fence. Xander's ranch. As they approached, men came running from the barn, rifles ready until they recognized their boss. Josiah Tucker was among them, his weathered face breaking into a relieved smile. "About time you showed up," he called. "Was about to organize a search party." "Ran into some trouble," Xander replied as they dismounted. "Callahan's men. They'll likely be back in force." Tucker's expression grew serious as he took in the baby in Grace's arms. "So you found the little one. Good." He turned to the gathered ranch hands. "Mason, Peters, double the watches tonight. Johnson, ride to town and warn the sheriff that we might have trouble coming." The men dispersed to their tasks with efficient precision, while Tucker led Grace and Xander toward the main house. "Your place all right, Mrs. O'Malley?" he asked as they walked. "Kept an eye on it like I promised, but couldn't be there all the time." "I'm sure it's fine, Mr. Tucker. Thank you for watching over it." Grace was overwhelmed by the kindness these men had shown her strangers just days ago, now risking their lives to protect her and James. The main house was larger than Grace had expected, solidly built with a wide porch wrapping around three sides. Inside, it was simply but comfortably furnished, with a large stone fireplace dominating the main room. A middle-aged woman with iron-gray hair emerged from what appeared to be the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. "Thank the Lord you're back," she exclaimed, hurrying toward them. "We've been worried sick." "Mrs. Abernathy, our housekeeper," Xander introduced. "Martha, this is Mrs. O'Malley and her son James. They'll be staying with us for a while." Martha's eyes softened as she noticed the baby. "Poor little mite looks exhausted. And you too, madam. Come, I'll show you to a room where you can freshen up. Supper will be ready shortly." Grace allowed herself to be led upstairs to a pleasant bedroom with a large bed and a smaller trundle that Martha quickly adapted into a makeshift crib. For the first time in days, Grace was able to properly clean both herself and James, changing into a borrowed nightgown while Martha took her dust-covered clothes to be washed. When she returned downstairs, James sleeping peacefully in her arms, she found Xander and Tucker deep in conversation by the fireplace, their expressions grave. They fell silent as she entered. "James is asleep," she announced softly. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," Xander assured her, rising to pull out a chair at the dining table where places had been set. "We were just discussing security arrangements. You think they'll come here?" Grace settled James in her lap, reluctant to let him out of her sight even momentarily. Tucker nodded grimly. "Callahans don't forgive easily, but they're not fools either. This is well-defended property with plenty of men who know how to shoot." "I've sent for Sheriff Davis," Xander added, "though I don't expect much help from that quarter. And a telegraph to Captain Reed at Fort Buchanan, explaining the situation." Grace looked between them, a weight settling in her chest. "I've brought trouble to your doorstep. I'm sorry." "Don't be," Xander said firmly. "This was my choice." His gaze softened as it rested on James. "Some things are worth fighting for." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, laden with meaning that Grace wasn't quite ready to examine. Martha's arrival with a hearty meal provided a welcome distraction, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics as they ate. Later, after Tucker had departed to check on the night watch, Grace found herself alone with Xander in the main room, James dozing against her shoulder. A comfortable silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire. "Your home is lovely," Grace finally said. "Much nicer than I imagined a bachelor rancher would maintain." Xander smiled faintly. "Martha's influence mostly. She's been with me since I bought this place 7 years ago." Says a proper home needs a woman's touch, even if the owner is too stubborn to acquire a wife. Is that how she puts it? Her exact words are usually more colorful. He hesitated, then added, "She's right, though. This place was always meant for a family." The implication hung in the air, neither of them quite brave enough to address it directly. Instead, Grace asked, "How did you come to own a ranch in Arizona? You mentioned Nebraska before." Xander leaned back in his chair, his expression distant. "After Rebecca died, I drifted for a while. Worked as a hired gun, a scout for the army, whatever kept me moving. Ended up in Arizona during a cavalry campaign against Apache raiders. When it was over, I stayed, won some money in a poker game, and used it as a down payment on this land. It was nothing back then, scrubby grass and a falling down cabin." "You've built something impressive," Grace observed. "You should be proud." "Some days I am. Other days it just feels empty." His gaze met hers, uncharacteristically vulnerable. "Until recently, that is." Grace's heart quickened. "Xander." A sudden commotion outside interrupted whatever she might have said. Shouts and the sound of running feet had them both on alert instantly. Xander was on his feet, reaching for his revolver when Tucker burst through the door. "Ryder coming in fast," he reported breathlessly. "It's Johnson, he's wounded." Xander was moving immediately. "Stay here," he instructed Grace. "Keep the doors locked." Grace watched anxiously through the window as Xander and Tucker ran to meet the approaching rider, who was slumped precariously in his saddle. They helped him down and half-carried him toward the house. Grace hurried to open the door, cradling James with one arm. "Martha," she called, "bring bandages and hot water." Johnson was a young man, barely 20 from the looks of him, with blood staining his left side. "Callahan's," he gasped as they laid him on the sofa. "Ambushed me, on the way back from town. Sheriff's dead. They're coming. All of them." Xander's expression hardened. "How many? How far?" 15, maybe 20. Few hours behind me." Johnson winced as Martha began cleaning his wound. "Sorry, boss. Couldn't warn you sooner." "You did fine, son." Xander turned to Tucker. "Get the men ready, full defensive positions, and send someone to help Martha with Johnson." As Tucker hurried out, Xander turned to Grace, his expression grave. "You should take James to the root cellar. It's reinforced. Safest place on the property." Grace shook her head firmly. "I can shoot. My father taught me before he died, and Patrick insisted I practice. I won't hide while you all risk your lives for us." Xander studied her face, clearly wanting to argue but recognizing the determination in her eyes. "All right, but James stays somewhere secure. Martha can watch over him in the cellar." It was a reasonable compromise, though the thought of being separated from her son again, even briefly, made Grace's chest tighten painfully. Still, she nodded agreement, knowing it was for his safety. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity as the ranch prepared for the coming assault. Men fortified defensive positions, ammunition was distributed, and escape routes planned. Grace helped where she could, her heart growing heavier with each passing minute. All this danger, all these people at risk because of her. As sunset approached, Xander found her on the porch, staring out at the gathering darkness. James had been settled in the root cellar with Martha, surrounded by blankets and with enough supplies to last several days if necessary. Saying goodbye to him, even temporarily, had been one of the hardest things Grace had ever done. "It's not your fault," Xander said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "The Callahans have been a plague on this territory for years. This was always going to end in bloodshed eventually." "But why now? Why because of me?" Grace turned to him, anguish in her voice. "These men, your men, they could die tonight. They're fighting for something they believe in, protection of the innocent, justice. Those are things worth dying for, if it comes to that." Xander's gaze was steady. But I don't intend for it to come to that. We're well prepared, and the Callahans aren't expecting a fortified position. And after? If we survive this night? Xander took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. After, you and James will be safe. Whether that means here or somewhere else is your choice, but know that there's a place for you both here, if you want it. The sincerity in his eyes made Grace's breath catch. In less than a week, this man had become more important to her than she could have imagined. He had risked everything for her and James, asking nothing in return. And now he was offering them a home, a future. Why? She whispered. Why would you do all this for us? Xander seemed to struggle with his words, an unusual hesitation for such a decisive man. Because you woke something in me I thought was dead. Because your courage and determination reminded me what it means to live for something beyond just survival. He paused, his thumb gently stroking the back of her hand. Because when I look at you and James, I see the family I never thought I'd have. Grace's heart swelled, tears pricking at her eyes. Before she could respond, a shout from one of the lookouts shattered the moment. Riders approaching from the east. Xander's expression shifted instantly from vulnerability to determination. Stay close to the house. If things go badly, get to the cellar with James and Martha. He pressed a quick, fierce kiss to her forehead before striding toward the barn where his men were gathering. Grace watched him go, a prayer on her lips. Whatever happened next, she knew her life had changed irrevocably. Not just because of the danger they faced, but because of the man who had walked into it willingly for her sake. The night that followed was the longest of Grace's life. The Callahan Gang arrived with the full force of their fury, attacking the ranch from multiple directions. Gunfire erupted across the property as Xander's men defended their positions with disciplined precision. Grace stationed herself at an upstairs window with Patrick's revolver and a rifle Xander had given her. She fired only when she had clear shots, conscious of their limited ammunition. Below her, she could see Xander moving between defensive positions, directing his men with calm authority even as bullets whizzed around him. The initial assault lasted nearly an hour before the attackers fell back to regroup. In that brief respite, Grace hurried to check on the wounded 3 of Xander's men had been hit, though none fatally. Tucker had a graze along his temple that bled profusely, but left him otherwise unharmed. They'll try to burn us out next, he predicted grimly as Grace bandaged his wound. It's what they did to the Harmons. True to his prediction, the second attack came with flaming arrows aimed at the barn and outbuildings. Men rushed to extinguish the fires before they could spread, exposing themselves to enemy fire in the process. One of the young ranch hands, barely older than a boy, took a bullet to the chest as he battled flames near the corral. Grace watched in horror as he crumpled to the ground. She was running toward him before she could think better of it, ducking low and weaving between cover. Bullets kicked up dust around her, but somehow she reached the fallen boy unharmed. He was still breathing, though blood bubbled at his lips with each labored gasp. Hold on, she urged, pressing her hands against the wound to staunch the bleeding. Help is coming. Strong arms suddenly wrapped around her, dragging her behind the shelter of a water trough as more bullets splintered the wood around them. It was Xander, his face streaked with soot and grim determination. Are you trying to get yourself killed? He demanded, though there was more fear than anger in his voice. He's just a boy, Grace protested, struggling against his grip. We can't leave him out there. Xander's expression softened slightly. Peters and Jackson are bringing him in from the other side. Look. True to his word, 2 men were carefully moving the wounded ranch hand to safety, using a barn door as a makeshift stretcher. Grace sagged against Xander in relief. You have to stay safe, he said urgently. For James. For... He stopped, seeming to battle with himself before adding more quietly. For me. Their eyes met, and in that moment, amid the chaos of battle, something crystallized between them, an understanding, a promise. Then a shout from Tucker drew Xander's attention, and he was gone, squeezing her hand once before disappearing back into the fray. The battle continued through the night, ebbing and flowing as the Callahans tried different tactics to breach the ranch's defenses. By dawn, both sides were exhausted, ammunition running low. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten when Grace, still at her post by the upstairs window, spotted movement on the ridge overlooking the ranch. Her heart sank. Reinforcements for the Callahans. They were doomed. But as the new arrivals drew closer, she realized they weren't outlaws. The rising sun glinted off brass buttons and blue uniforms. The cavalry had arrived. Captain Reed, responding to Xander's telegraph, had brought a full company of soldiers. The Callahan Gang, caught between the ranch defenders and the approaching cavalry, scattered in disarray. Some surrendered, others fled into the hills. Fergus Callahan himself, recognizing defeat, attempted to escape on horseback only to be cut down by cavalry fire as he tried to break through their lines. By mid-morning, it was over. The ranch was secured, the surviving outlaws in custody, and the wounded being tended to. Grace reunited with James, tears streaming down her face as she held her son close, scarcely able to believe they had survived. She found Xander on the porch, speaking with Captain Reed. His left arm was in a makeshift sling. A bullet had grazed his shoulder during the final hours of the fight, but otherwise he appeared unharmed. "Mrs. O'Malley," Captain Reed greeted her, tipping his hat. "Mr. Novak has told me about your ordeal. You have my assurance that the remaining members of the Callahan Gang will face justice for their crimes." "Thank you, Captain." Grace shifted James in her arms. "And thank you for coming to our aid. I believe you saved many lives today." "Just doing my duty, madam." Reed nodded to them both. "I'll leave you to your recovery. We'll need statements from both of you once things have settled." When the captain had departed, Grace turned to Xander, suddenly shy despite everything they had been through together. "Your arm?" "It's nothing," he dismissed. "Martha's already fussed over it more than necessary." His gaze softened as it rested on James, who was contentedly gumming his fist. "He seems none the worse for wear." "Children are resilient." Grace hesitated, then added, "Xander, about what you said last night, before the attack." "I meant every word," he interrupted gently, "but I understand if you need time, or if you'd prefer to make a fresh start somewhere else. You've been through a lot." Grace studied him, this strong, principled man who had risked everything for her and James. In just a week, he had become more important to her than she would have thought possible. What had begun as desperate necessity had transformed into something deeper, something with the potential to heal both their wounded hearts. "I don't need time," she said softly, "and I don't want to start over somewhere else. What I want, what James and I both need, is right here." Hope flickered in Xander's eyes. "Are you certain?" "I'm not an easy man, Grace. I've lived alone a long time. And I've made one disastrous marriage based on lies and pretty words," she countered. "I'm not looking for easy. I'm looking for real, for true." She stepped closer, James nestled between them. "You showed me who you are in the hardest moments possible. I believe in that man. I trust him with my life and my son's life." Xander reached out, gently touching James's cheek with one finger. The baby grabbed it immediately, his tiny fist closing around it with surprising strength. Something like wonder crossed Xander's face. "I never thought I'd have this," he admitted quietly. "A family. A chance to protect something instead of avenge it." "Is that what you want? Us to be your family?" Xander met her gaze steadily. "More than anything. But it has to be your choice, Grace. Freely made." Grace considered all they had been through, all they had overcome together. She thought of how he had risked everything to save James, how he had opened his home and heart to them both. There was no uncertainty in her mind or her heart. "It is my choice," she said firmly, And I choose you, Xander Novak. I choose us. The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after the longest night. Mindful of his injured arm and the baby between them, he leaned forward and kissed her gently at first, then with growing certainty as she responded. It was a promise, a beginning. When they finally parted, Grace rested her forehead against his. James contentedly nestled between them. "So what happens now?" she whispered. Xander's smile held all the warmth and promise of the future stretching before them. "Now we build a life. Together." And as the morning sun rose higher over the ranch, their ranch, Grace knew with absolute certainty that the home she had always longed for wasn't a place at all. It was here, in the circle of Xander's arms, with James between them and endless possibilities ahead. 3 years later, the Novak Ranch had flourished into one of the most successful operations in the territory. The main house, once so empty, now rang with the laughter of children. James, now a sturdy toddler with his mother's eyes and a mischievous grin, and his baby sister Rebecca, named for the aunt she would never meet, but whose memory lived on in the family stories Xander shared. Grace stood on the porch, watching as Xander patiently taught James to ride his first pony, the love between father and son evident in every careful instruction, every proud smile. She cradled Rebecca against her shoulder, the baby's soft breaths warm against her neck. The Callahan Gang was long gone, its surviving members serving time in territorial prison. The ranch had known peace since that fateful night, though Grace knew they would never take their safety for granted. Life in the West was still hard, still dangerous at times, but they faced it together. A family forged in adversity and bound by something stronger than blood choice, commitment, and unwavering love. As if sensing her thoughts, Xander looked up, his gaze finding hers across the yard. The connection between them, strong from those first desperate days, had only deepened with time and trust. Grace smiled at her husband, her heart full to overflowing with the life they had built together. From tragedy had come triumph. From desperation had come devotion. And from the darkest night of her life had dawned the brightest of futures, one that neither of them had dared to imagine, but both had helped to create. One brave choice at a time.